Well, good evening, everyone. We will probably linger for just a couple of seconds before we get started and do any introductions. I'd actually like to open us in a word of prayer, if that's okay. So let's pray really quick. God, we just thank you for this time that we could gather together with our students. God, I just pray that what we're able to share tonight is helpful to them and useful. Father, help them to always know that one of the big goals for us here at LAPU is to walk alongside our students and to be helpful in assisting with them. We commit this time to you and in all the discussion that happens throughout the rest of this hour. We just thank you in your son's name. Amen. Well, good evening. My name is Gordon Jorgensen. I am one of the assistant deans here at Los Angeles Pacific. I am also a frequent instructor in our liberal studies program, as well as our multiple subject teaching credential program. Even though my main responsibilities are as an administrator, I am always teaching at least one course per session, mostly for two reasons. I love being able to stay in the virtual classroom so that I know what our students are dealing with. And really, I love teaching. Teaching was my first love. I started as a teacher back in 1990, probably before some of you were even born. So I've been in education a long time, well over 30 years. I've taught in public ed. I've been in higher ed now for about 18 years. My entire time during that 18 years has been spent in non-traditional student populations, both face-to-face and online. So I'm hopeful tonight that more than anything, I won't be somebody who sounds like they know it all, but just somebody who can speak from experience, from many conversations I've had with students that have been in my programs or in the classes that I'm actually the instructor. So I want to welcome you. One of the things that I want you to know is that this webinar is being co-hosted by Carrie Aikman, who's one of our success coaches. So Carrie, go ahead and take a couple of minutes to introduce yourself.
Yes, hello everyone, I'm Carrie, as Gordon said, and I'm a success coach here. I've been doing that for about 10 years now, and I've worked with literally probably over 1,000 students at this point, and I love working with adult students. That's why I'm here. I have a master's degree from Pepperdine, and I have been doing some writing outside. So I'm very excited to be here to co-host with Gordon. Part of the reason why we wanted to do this is that Academics and Success wanted to team up to provide as many resources as we could for our students, and our professors and our coaches work with students more than anyone else. So we're hoping to be able to continue to work together. So I'm excited to be here. And alongside with Gordon, yes, I don't know it all either, but I want to provide some resources to be helpful for you so that we can all continue to go on this journey together. That's what we're here to do. So what I want to encourage you is that if you have questions, there's a chat feature or a Q&A. You can use the chat and chat during the webinar. I will be checking that, and I will be periodically asking the questions out loud. If you have a private question, you can do that, but we encourage public ones because if you're thinking it, other people are thinking it as well. So welcome. We're excited that you're here.
Great. So to get started with, we actually want to ask all of you a question, and we're hoping that you'll post some answers in the chat. And we simply are just wanting to start off with this question you see in front of you. What are the challenges that non-traditional adult students have when it comes time to complete a writing assignment? And keep in mind, when we say writing assignment, we know that most of the classes that you'll take here at LAPU are most heavily assessed with writing assignments, whether that's the discussions that you contribute to each week or papers that you're writing in the different classes that you're in. So we know that there's a lot of writing to be done when you're in these classes. So does anybody have any responses to what some of the challenges are that you faced?
Some people might be thinking about that. I know what I hear a lot from students is APA formatting. That tends to be something that they come up with. And also I hear a lot of how do I write that's different than how we have been speaking, because we speak and we text in a very different form than we write. So those are some things that I hear. Does anyone have anything else that they would like to share?
It's like it's a little bit of a bashful group. Well, if you think of something that you want to put into the chat that's a challenge, feel free. We can always stop and come back to those, but we'll get moving with the webinar so we don't run out of time. One of the things that I notice that is frequently a challenge for writing assignments at LAPU is that students, for whatever reason, don't take enough time to thoroughly review the instructions and requirements for the paper that they need to write. So what we decided to do for this webinar is we're going to use one of this is an actual assignment from ISTU 101. You probably have seen this assignment, most of you at some point in your journey here, as most people take ISTU 101 as one of their first courses. But I wanted to just kind of use something practical instead of just talking about all this stuff from a theoretical perspective. I wanted to be able to share practical things that might help you better understand what we're talking about in terms of the writing process. So one of the things that I think is a huge challenge for every student that we have at LAPU is being able to plan an adequate amount of time. We know that our students are super busy. We know that most of you are working full-time jobs, that you have family responsibilities to take care of, that you want to have some kind of a personal life and be able to have fun on the weekends sometimes. And so there are a lot of challenges to planning enough time. And so I wanted to start off by saying, if you are allowing yourself to wait until the day before the assignment is due, most of our assignments are due on Monday morning at 8 o'clock. If you're waiting until Sunday to write that paper, that is probably not the best use of your planning. So I want to challenge you to start your planning earlier in the week and try to break it up into smaller chunks of time. We're going to talk about writing as a process as we go through this webinar. And so think about the process in terms of doing maybe a little bit every other day instead of waiting till the last minute, because typically the students that get forced into a situation where they wait till the last minute end up writing a paper that's not as strong as it could be. Makes sense? So let's talk about reading and going through the instructions. You'll see in the example that we have here that there are some assignment instructions for this reflection essay. It says you're going to write a reflection paper that answers the big question, who am I? There's going to be an introduction. There's going to be a focus on who you are as a learner. Next is who you are in your career or your work life, followed by who you are as a person of faith, and then a conclusion. So automatically from the beginning, I would hope that you would be thinking to yourself, there are going to be 5 sections to this paper that I'm going to write. There are 5 big instructions. That kind of translates into 5 different sections of the paper. The other part are the assignment requirements. This particular paper requires a title page. I teach this class from time to time, and I would say on average, at least about a quarter to a third of the students, the first time they submit this reflection, it does not have a title page. And title pages are pretty straightforward and simple. You know, we provide templates so you can just put in your information and take out the generic information. But a lot of people miss this just because they don't look at the requirements. Some of the other requirements that you will see is that some of the big requirements are how long does the paper need to be? This one shows a length of 500 to 750 words. Typically, we tell people, on average, right around 250 words or so of text for one page. So this is going to be somewhere between a 3 to 4 page paper, right? And then you can see at the end there's a instruction to include in-text citations from your textbooks or other scholarly resources. So that means I'm going to have some APA citations in this paper too. So one of the reasons why we want to go through this is to remind you that the instructions and the requirements are really important, mainly because a lot of them are somewhat objective. So if I'm the instructor grading this paper and you haven't written a paper, if you haven't written a paragraph about who you are as a person of faith in this particular essay, you're probably going to lose a significant amount of points because that's one of the main parts of this essay. The same thing goes for things like the paper length. If you submit a paper that's 1.5 pages, you probably can imagine that's probably not going to be as good as a paper that's in that 3 to 4 page range. In the same sense, you probably don't want to also submit a paper that's 10 pages long for this essay. And believe it or not, I've seen them almost 10 pages for this exact assignment, because I think people start writing and they start writing and they keep writing and they don't know where to stop writing. And the next thing you know, they have 10 pages written because you're writing this particular paper about yourself. So it's kind of easy to get carried away and go too far past the assignment requirements for length. Let's go to the next slide. The next thing that you should look at before you start doing any of your work is the assignment rubric. This is the part of the syllabus that will tell you exactly how an assignment is going to be graded. Now, this particular rubric is from our discussion forums. The rubric for the reflection essay was really big and we couldn't fit it on one slide without the type being so small that you couldn't read it. But rubrics in general have two main components. If you look along the left-hand side of the rubric, you will find what we call the criteria. Those are the things that you need to make sure that you do or cover in your essay. So for a discussion, you should have evidence of critical thinking. You should also have evidence of engaging with your peers. And then you should also have contributions to the overall discussion so that you're not just sharing your opinion and then ignoring what everybody else is saying. The same thing goes for an essay. The rubric for the particular reflection essay would have sections on how well you're addressing the information that's in the instructions. The instructions are always connected to the criteria, right? And then the other part of the rubric is across the top where you see that descriptor called performance levels. If you want to get the highest possible grade, then you want to make sure that your work fits with the description under exemplary. And I can tell you, most of the time when I'm grading student essays like the reflection essay or grading student discussions, it's usually rarely am I struggling with, is this exemplary or beginning? It's usually a no-brainer. It's either one or the other. If somebody misses it, they usually miss it pretty bad. If they hit it out of the park and get it right, they hit it pretty good and get it right. And the ones that consistently get exemplary scores, I'm convinced are the students that are consistent about making sure they check the rubric. I would even go so far as to suggest print a copy of the rubric for the assignment that you're working on and put it down next to the computer as you're doing your work. Put it down next to the piece of paper if you're doing pre-writing work on a piece of paper, because those things in the rubric will help remind you and help guide you and keep your focus on the things that you're going to be held accountable for and graded for. All right, next slide.
Before we go further, I wanted to address a couple of things. We had one student comment that they were nervous when it comes to writing, so we hope that we can ease some of those fears a little bit tonight. And I did want to follow up about where you can find your syllabus. If you're not sure where your syllabus is, you can always go in the course resources folder in your courses. So if you click on your courses and you have the different weeks, week 1, week 2, one of those folders beneath those sections beneath that has course resources. You'll find it there. Or in the beginning of your courses homepage, there's a search syllabus. You can find it that way too.
Yeah, it's interesting that someone mentioned being nervous. I get nervous when I have to write something. I think it's a normal human reaction to any kind of work that we have to do. So I say that to tell you it's completely normal to be nervous. The one thing I would encourage you to do is when you're nervous about something, I think it helps to talk to somebody about it. And that somebody could be your success coach, could be your instructor, it could be a classmate that's in the class that you're in, somebody that you've met along the way. It could be a family member. It could be any other person. But I think if you are nervous, try talking to somebody for a few minutes, because usually that'll help calm things down. And I think also it helps you realize being nervous is normal. Everybody gets nervous. The other thing I will say just in finishing that is, if I think about all the different students I've had over the years, especially in courses that have writing assignments, on average, I would say less than 2% of my students actually reach out to me as the instructor when they have questions or when they're nervous about something. And so I want to encourage you to ask your instructor. Don't feel like you got to call them on the phone. I know that can be super intimidating, but shoot them an email. They all have email addresses that are posted in your course in the Professor Corner. You can message them through the course if you want. And I will tell you, I know for myself and every instructor that I know at LAPU, we love it when students ask us questions. We love it when students reach out and want to help, because that's really one of the main reasons why we're in the profession that we're in. It's a people business and we want to help students be successful. Our goal is not to stamp you out and tell you that you don't know what you're doing. That's not what you're ever going to hear at this place. Okay.
Oh, and Gordon, we have someone else that said they don't feel nervous so much as they feel overwhelmed. So what would you say to that student?
I say overwhelmed is also natural, but I'm hopeful that if you will keep a copy of the slides from this webinar that we'll send to you after the webinar is over, when it comes to writing assignments, if you follow the processes that we're going to suggest, I think you'll find yourself much, much less overwhelmed by the process of writing a paper. Okay. So the first thing when you're in this pre-writing stage, we haven't written anything. All we've done so far is we've looked at the instructions, we've looked at the requirements, and we've looked at the rubric. The next thing we want to think about is who's the audience? Who is going to read this? There really are only two audiences that you're going to write for at LAPU. You're either going to be writing for your instructor, or you're going to be writing for your course colleagues, your classmates, when you're in a discussion. Yes, the instructor will grade the discussions, but a lot of the engagement that happens back and forth in the discussion really focuses on the audience of the discussion. How well do you interact with your peers? Do you have a hard time discussing whatever the prompts are in the discussion? Do you engage with each other or not? I'm telling you, if you engage with your peers in the discussions, you're going to get good grades on those discussions. If you're writing a paper, everything gets graded by the instructor. So remember who the audience is, and remember that this is an academic process. Yes, it makes you nervous. Yes, it's a little overwhelming. But at the end of the day, one of the things that we want you to get better at is this whole communication through writing. And the reason why is because we know that when you get to your next class and your higher level classes, the classes that are part of your major, if you decide to go on and get a master's degree later, for sure, when you get out into the professional world, you're going to have to write things. And you want to be a good writer, and you want to be able to successfully communicate through the written word. Most of the students that I work with in my programs move on and go on to become teachers. And one of the things that principals tell me all the time is we need to make sure that we're preparing our future teachers to be good writers, because you have to write so much as a teacher. So that professional expectation is also there. So know who your audience is. The next thing is, what is the purpose of this paper? If we think back to that original reflection paper and those instructions, the purpose of that paper is to tell your instructors, who am I? You're answering that question. Who am I? Who am I as a learner? Who am I as a person in my career? Who am I as a person of faith? So that you get to reflect on who you are, and communicate that in writing to the instructor. So always know what the purpose is of the essay. And I guarantee you, in all the courses that you'll take here at LAPU, it will be pretty easy for you to figure out what the purpose is if you're good at reading the instructions for the assignment. We're really good at being practical about that sort of thing around here. The next thing you're going to have to do for most papers is research the topic. You remember back in the instructions that there are some requirements for that essay to have at least a couple of APA references within your paper. And I don't want to get too in depth into APA at this point, but I just want to generally speak and generally tell you that when you see that there are references required, one of the things that you should be thinking in the back of your mind is, the instructor wants to read more than just my personal opinion. The instructor wants me to share an informed perspective on what I'm writing. And the information that helps inform you can come from things like the presentations or the materials from your course. It can come from the textbooks that go along with your course. It can come from library books or articles that you might get it from the library. One of the things that students do, we all do it, is when we're curious about something, our first instinct is to Google it now, right? So we Google the topic. So many people that I talk to along their journey in their degree programs don't even understand that there is a similar search engine that's called Google Scholar. So if you go into regular Google and Google the two words Google Scholar, a new window will pop up that looks very similar to the regular Google window. But the great thing about it is, when you type something in the search for Google Scholar, you will only get scholarly resources returned to you. Because I think we all are aware, anybody can put anything on the internet. And that doesn't mean that it's scholarly. It might not even mean that it's true, for all that goes. So you want to be careful about Googling something. Google can be useful, but if you're going to Google for research purposes on a paper, please use Google Scholar. I promise it will be just as good. You'll get more information that you know what to do with, and you'll have the assurance that it's not some crazy person making up something in their basement somewhere. The last thing I want to say about researching is, avoid Wikipedia. In fact, I would say don't ever use Wikipedia to help you with anything that has to do with your college writing experience. And the reason for that is a lot of people get confused and they think because Wikipedia sounds like encyclopedia, that Wikipedia must be a really reliable source. And I don't think most people realize Wikipedia is just a bunch of information that people from around the world put in there. Anybody can put anything on Wikipedia anytime. It's a user interface that lets you can change or add something to Wikipedia anytime you want. And since that happens, it's not a reliable source. And so it can often be wrong or fictitious. So that's why I say just avoid Wikipedia altogether. Don't even use it. In fact, when I see students who cite Wikipedia as a source, one of the things I do is I shoot them an email immediately and say, please don't use Wikipedia anymore. It's bad for your academic career. All right, let's go to the next slide. So now that we've gone through some research, we can start brainstorming a little. And brainstorming, I think, is one of those steps that most adult students don't do, mostly because they just feel like I don't have time to do this, right? I have to get my kids fed dinner, I have to get my kids to bed, and then I have to do my work before I go to bed. I don't have time to do brainstorming. So I'm just going to start writing. And one of the things that I want you all to understand is this process that we call academic writing can be much, much stronger when you have a plan that includes all these different steps, right? So the first step was making sure we know the instructions and the requirements. The next step is knowing the rubric. The next step is making sure that we do some research so that we can talk intelligently or write intelligently about what we're writing about. So the next step is organizing all of these thoughts. And brainstorming is a good way to organize. I put the assignment instructions on this slide, excuse me, because I wanted to take us back and give you some practical suggestions on how I think it would make sense to do some brainstorming. One of the easiest things in the world to use, you can see the little graphic here on the slide, is a circle map. So for this essay, if I were doing a brainstorming myself, I would draw the circle in the middle and I would write the statement, who am I? Because that's what this paper is about. That's the main thing. It's the main topic. And then the other circles that are surrounding, I would make sure I would have one circle that says, who am I as a learner? I would make sure I have a circle that says, who am I in my career? I would make sure I have a circle that says, who am I as a person of faith? The other circles could be other aspects of who you are, and that's perfectly okay. But one thing I want you to make sure that you don't do is leave out any of the parts that are in the assignment instructions. Most of the time when students don't do well on this paper, they forget to put in parts of the essay that are required. Or they will just start writing. They won't brainstorm, they won't plan their writing, they won't do any of these pre-writing activities. And they'll have an introduction and they'll have, remember, we're talking, let's just think about this as a 4-page paper. They will have 2 pages as who am I as a learner. They'll have a half page on an introduction. And then they'll have another page on who I am in my career. And then they realize I'm almost at 4 pages. And then they write 1 paragraph about who I am as a person of faith and 1 quick paragraph, a couple of sentences and a conclusion, and then they stop. And so what happens then is the paper is woefully out of balance. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. But when you do a brainstorming activity and use a graphic organizer like a circle map, it helps you plan things out. It helps you start this process that we call maintaining the balance within your essay. Once you get all that information in the different circles, now you can start narrowing your focus. you can start crossing out maybe some of the smaller things that are less important. Yeah, I don't think I need to write that when I was in high school, I played basketball for the boys basketball team. That's probably not important to an essay like this. So you'll be able to use the graphic organizer to help you narrow your focus and choose what things are the most important parts for each of these sections of your essay. And then once you get that done, the next thing that we suggest you do is to create an outline. So the next slide is going to show you a sample outline for this exact essay. There were 5 bullets in the assignment instructions. There are 5 main parts of the outline. The first is the introduction, who I am as a learner, who I am in my career as a person of faith, followed by the conclusion. Now, even though this outline has 5 parts, I don't want you to be confused and think that each of the 5 parts should have an equal amount of writing about them. Typically in a paper this size, the introduction is going to be 1 paragraph. The conclusion at the end is going to be 1 paragraph. And the 3 main pieces in the middle are going to be probably 2 or 3 paragraphs each. And the reason for making the outline is because this is the place where it helps you create balance in your paper. This is where it helps you remember that I have to talk about all 5 of these things, not just the first 3 really well, and then hurry up through the last 2, if that makes sense. All right. Do we have any other questions, Carrie? Let me take a break and see if anybody has any questions.
No, we don't have any questions here, but I would just encourage you, if you're wondering, why do I have to do all this? What's the time? I want to encourage you that if you do these things, the writing process will go much faster than that. And it seems counterintuitive if you'd rather just jump right in, but to do all the prep work ahead of time makes the actual writing go a lot faster.
Yeah, I would echo that and agree that of all the students that I've had over the years that I talked to about what went well, what didn't go so well on a writing assignment, the ones who just sit down at the computer and start writing almost always do worse than those who have a plan and who have a process that they follow. Because the process helps clarify everything. It helps you make sure that you stay on task and you address all the different things that are required in the essay. It's real easy to get off track if you just sit there and start typing. So now that we've got our outline, we can start writing a draft. And the draft is the point at which you sit down at your computer and you start writing. I want to talk just briefly about thesis statements. A thesis statement is kind of like that main sentence where you tell the reader, this is what you are going to be reading about when you read this essay. Thesis statements are almost always in the introductory paragraph. I would say typically they're at the end of that introduction paragraph. And it's always going to depend on what the topic of the paper is. But you always want to be able to start your paper with a statement like a thesis statement that lets the reader know this is what you're about to read about. So you can help focus them and let them know where you're going with this paper. The next thing that you want to keep in the back of your mind as you're writing your draft is to be asking yourself, is the paper balanced? You know, we talked a little bit about that earlier. But for this particular essay, I would say a good balanced reflection essay based on the instructions that we shared earlier was 1 paragraph of introduction, 2 to 3 paragraphs that cover each of the who am I as a learner, who am I in my career, who am I as a person of faith, and then 1 good concluding paragraph at the end. And so if you write your draft and you get to the point where you think, okay, I'm finished, the draft is finished, and you notice I have twice as much written about who I am in my career as much as who I am as a learner, then you probably are going to want to go back and make some edits to that section. The other thing that I want to point out is that your paper needs to have structure. And what I mean by structure is the paper separated into distinct and different paragraphs? I get lots of essays submitted to me where the first line is indented. That means that's the telltale sign that a new paragraph is starting, right? We indent 5 spaces or we tab once. And then 4 pages of text. So it looks like there's one paragraph for the entire essay. So make sure that your essay has that kind of structure, because you'll lose points for that, for sure. Excuse me. And the other thing that I frequently notice and get asked about when it comes to writing is, what about sentence structure? And so let me share a few of my suggestions when it comes to sentences. Sentences should always have one topic. Sentences should have agreement between the subject of the sentence and the verb, right? If you were going to type, I've been working at Walmart for the past 10 years, you would not say, I've been work at Walmart for the past 10 years, right? Because now the subject and the verb don't agree. Whereas if you say, I have been working, then the subject and verb agree. And that's a grammar thing that we'll talk about a little bit later. But make sure that when you write your sentences, one of the other things that I like to suggest to students is think about the number 10 when you're writing a sentence. Most sentences probably should not be more than 10 words. And what I see a lot of times in some of these essays is students will have what we call sentence fragments. And it's almost like they're sending a text. So they're shortening things up. And so a sentence will be 3 words long. It's really hard to communicate something in 3 words in a sentence. And so try to avoid fragments, like we call that a sentence fragment, where you partially say something, but you don't completely say it in your sentence. The other side of that coin is that we see a lot of sentences that are 25, 30 words long. They're separated by commas. I've been working for 10 years at Walmart, comma, in the shoe sales department, comma. Before that, I was working in sporting goods, comma. And when I started, I was working in the tire center. So that looks like one sentence because there's only one period at the end, but there are 3 commas in the middle. We call that comma splicing. Try your best to avoid that at all costs in your academic writing. Academic writing should be concise. And when I say concise, it means it should be short and to the point. So that sentence that I just told you about all the different jobs that I had at Walmart, it's really 4 different sentences. It would be much better for you from an academic writing perspective to write 4 short sentences about each of those different jobs versus one long run-on sentence. That's what we call a sentence that has multiple topics and an overuse of words and commas. So try to avoid those long run-on sentences in your academic writing.
Gordon, I have a comment that I'm wondering if you could elaborate on. When we go back to this, who we are writing for, we're writing for a professor or for our colleagues in an academic setting. Can you talk a little bit about tone and the difference between how we would talk or speak to a friend and casually and how we would write in a paper?
Yeah, I would say in terms of academic writing, you want to stick to the facts and use as little emotion or as little figurative, flowery language as possible. And emotion could be positive emotion. It could be excitement about something, or it could be negative and be bad. But you want to avoid that kind of unnecessary language or unnecessary feeling behind the words that you choose to make up your sentence. You kind of almost want to have this idea of keep it to the facts versus letting it get too out of control from an emotional or poetic type of thing. Instructors don't want to read that kind of stuff. Most of the assignments that we have are academic in nature, so you should get to the point, talk about the facts, just the facts, ma'am, please, that kind of a thing, and leave it there. Did that answer your question, Carrie?
It did. It did. And I like to tell students this is if you're meeting someone formal in a setting, not that you're talking casually to your friend on text, just to keep that in mind.
Yeah, you're not writing it to one of your kids or one of your relatives or one of your girlfriends or boyfriends or anyone like that. You're writing it to your instructor, so it needs to have an academic focus to it, for sure. So now that you have the draft, we're going to start this process that we call editing. And before you even get to the editing process, let's just assume, okay, I'm typing along and I finished my draft. I think I'm done. My strong suggestion for you at that point, get up from your computer, go take a break, get something to eat, go for a walk, go watch a TV show, go do something that gets you away from your computer for at least a half an hour. Even longer would be fine. And the reason for that is we want you to do a couple of things. We want you to get away from the paper so that you can let your brain take a break, let your emotions take a break if it was hard and you're kind of worn out from it. And the other thing that we want you to do in terms of taking a break from the writing process is it's going to help you focus more on this editing step. Editing is best done with a fresh perspective. And you can't have a fresh perspective if you just move from the draft writing and 30 seconds later you try to start editing. It's a lot more difficult to do it that way. So give yourself a little bit of a break in between. The first and the easiest part of editing are this acronym that I refer to as COPS. I literally learned this acronym back when I was a junior high school teacher. That's how far back it goes for me. Because these are the things that are a little bit easier for you to notice and fix. Things like capitalization. Is the first word in every sentence capitalized? Is the word I capitalized? This paper, the reflection paper, is written from the first person. So the word I is going to be all over this essay. And you would be amazed at how many times I see these essays come in and the I's are not capitalized. Anytime you type the word I when you're referring to yourself in a paper, it should always be capitalized. The next thing is, organization. Is the paper organized well? Do you have paragraphs? Do you have different sections within each of those paragraphs? Then punctuation. Do you have the periods and commas in the right places, or quotation marks, or brackets if you have a citation? And then finally, spelling and grammar. Every different word processor that's out there right now has spelling and grammar check built into, whether it's Google Docs, Microsoft Word, or any other word processing program that you're going to use. The other thing that I highly, highly recommend for everyone who writes anything at Los Angeles Pacific is to download the app that's called Grammarly. Grammarly, there are two types of service from Grammarly. You can get the free version, which is what I want you to all get. And then you can get a paid version, which I don't think anybody needs. I've seen the paid version. I use the free version in all the things I write myself. If I'm writing an email, Grammarly catches a problem for me. If I'm writing a paper for something, Grammarly catches it. If I'm writing a message to a student inside the course, Grammarly catches it, because the app is built into all the different writing processes that go on in your computer. So please get Grammarly. The next thing that I suggest in the editing process, and this is kind of a weird one for a lot of people, because they think, well, it's kind of weird for me to sit there and read my paper out loud. But what I really think is super helpful is print a copy of the paper and read it out loud. You will be amazed at how many things you catch by reading it out loud, where you tell yourself, yeah, that doesn't sound right. Or, uh-oh, that was a sentence fragment. I need to fix that. Or, uh-oh, that was a run-on sentence because it started on this line and didn't finish until 3 lines later. And I just kept reading and reading and reading. I was getting tired. I was reading so much on that sentence. So read the paper out loud. You'll be amazed at how much you're able to catch in your editing process there. The other thing, if you can, is have somebody else read your drafts. That could be somebody who's in the class with you. You can make an agreement. Hey, I'll read yours, you read mine, and we'll help each other out. We have tutor.com that's available at LAPU, where the tutors will read your paper for free. It doesn't cost you anything. They're available 24/7. You can have a friend, a family member read the paper. I think you'll be amazed at having somebody else read it, at some of the things that they will catch that you didn't even see until they said something about it. And the reason for that is you're looking at this paper so much, a lot of times the brain fools yourself and you just miss things that were plain as day to another person. So I strongly suggest that you have somebody else read your draft if you can. Next, before you finish, recheck the balance and make sure that you aligned yourself to the instructions, that you've hit all the things and the requirements. I would also review the rubric one more time. And then guess what? It's time to submit the paper. The one other thing I will say when it comes to submitting the paper, many of the writing assignments at LAPU have plagiarism check built into them, right? So your paper is going to get checked for plagiarism if you've copied something from somewhere. And the good thing about the plagiarism checker is you can check your own paper yourself ahead of time if you want. So I encourage you to do that, because you might find something that will help keep you out of trouble with your instructor. If you maybe, sometimes students will tell me, yeah, I copied that from this other website and I put it in there and I meant to take it out after I finished writing my paper, but they forgot to take it out. And then there it is, it gets flagged by the plagiarism checker, turn it in, and now we're in a whole different set of problems with plagiarism. Plagiarism is one of the worst things you can do as a student, I will tell you. It's something that can get you in a lot of trouble really quick. So take advantage of that self-check in the plagiarism checker, but also know that it's going to be checked in a lot of the writing assignments. And then of course, make sure you submit your paper on time. That way you won't lose any points for being late. All right, Kara.
All right, well, the next thing is I'm going to talk a little bit about the resources here before we wrap up, because some of these were mentioned and you might want to know like how do I access these things? So on the left side of the screen is that general, when you go to my.lapu.edu, you'll see links right there to the library, to tutoring, and what we call the Writing Resource Hub, which I'm going to highlight in about another minute. If you're in your courses itself, these things are always available to you. They're always going to be on the upper left-hand side, the APU library links there. And I do want to, and I'll get to this in a second, the APU library and LAPU are the same. And so underneath here is also where you access tutor.com. Do not Google it by itself, and then the resource hub. So these are the things we'll be talking about and where you can find them. We'll go through these. The first one is tutor.com. So when you go back and when you click on tutor.com, please make sure you click on it in your courses. If you Google it, tutor.com, it's going to ask you to set up an account and pay for it. Do not pay for it. It comes with your tuition and free. So when you're in your courses, go up to the help section, click on tutor.com. It will pop up automatically with your name, as you can see here. And they'll say, hi, your name there. And a couple of things here. Once again, this is a 24-hour service, which means you can connect with a tutor now anywhere in the world. Sometimes with math, you might not be able to connect right away, but with writing, our tutors are everywhere all the time. So if the only time you have available is 11 p.m. when everybody's gone to bed, you can go ahead and connect with a tutor live and they can help you with something specifically. The other thing that we mentioned is have someone read your paper. So if you're short on time, you can actually come into tutor.com. It's clicked right there on the submit button in yellow. You can submit your paper and you can walk away and you can do other things. And I think it's about 6 hours. A tutor will read it and come back to you with commentary. So if you've written something but don't have time to sit with a tutor, you can go ahead and submit a paper. Again, this is free. Something I also like to point out with tutor.com, if you're in a tutoring session with a tutor that you're just not clicking with, you can politely leave and then you can go right away and log back in and find another tutor. Just make sure you remember their name to don't click on it again, but you can certainly do that. If for some reason you run out of your minutes, students are allowed at about a half hour a week on average. You can use that in chunks or space it out. But if you run out of minutes, please talk to your coach because there is a way you can request more minutes for free. So that is tutor.com there. The other resource is the library. So again, we talked a little bit about where you can find that. Again, APU Library and LAPU Library are the same. We are sister schools, so we use the same database. So when you click in here, don't worry about if you see APU, it's okay. It's the library that you want to do. The other thing is that when you're doing library research here, you want to make sure that you're looking for peer-reviewed articles. Those are informed opinions by experts in the field. It's not quite like Wikipedia, but if you don't check this box or look for those specifically, you're not getting the best of the best, and you might get things that are not reliable or informed. So that is something to look for when you're doing your research. If you don't know how to do research, ask your success coach. I have walked through many students through this, or there's a wonderful chat the librarian feature that you can do. If you're looking for a database to like, my favorite is Academic Search Premier. You can search by databases A through Z. I think it's the third one down. It's very helpful. If you use Academic Search in Premier, this is what it'll look like. Here, some of the things that you can see. You can edit and do your search up at the top. You can even go search within a search. Those were the 3 different things that you can do there. They'll have full text options that you can view the article, and you can even shift the publication date, some of those things that you can do with the library. So if you have more questions, talk to your coach. Last, for the internal resource, we have something new here that we just launched, which is our Writing Resource Hub. This will be found in the same help section here, and I cannot recommend it enough. There's some wonderful resources. We have so many tutorials here. If you're like, I don't know how to cite something in APA, or how many spaces do I need and what font, all of that is in our Writing Sources Hub. We have tutorials, we have templates where you can go in and download a template there that has the APA formatting already. So many different things. We have our plagiarism check here. We have some of the writing essentials that we talked through, the processes here. And we have even some more wonderful videos here about going in more depth about writing. It is a wonderful resource and I highly recommend it here. So those are our internal resources. Gordon did mention a couple of external ones, and I want to highlight those here at the end here. He did already talked about Grammarly, and the other 2 that we have here is Purdue OWL and the Citation Machine. Citation Machine is free. You can go in and it'll help you cite a source. But Gordon, do you want to reference Purdue OWL? And when you get these slides and you follow the link, these will take you directly to here.
Yeah, a lot of people think, why is it called an OWL? OWL is an acronym for Online Writing Lab. So the one thing to remember when you go to Purdue OWL is to go into their APA portion of their site, because they offer citation and research help with all the different citation formats. But at LAPU, we only use APA formatting. So just make sure you go to the APA section of Purdue OWL.
Gordon, do you have any comments about resources, internal or external?
No, I think the biggest thing that I would say when it comes to the resources is, chances are this webinar is going to end in a few minutes, and by tomorrow you probably will have forgotten some of these things. That's just how we are. We're humans. Our minds can't remember everything. Keep this copy of the slides, which we'll be emailing you after the webinar is over with. And then come back and look at the things that are in there. Use them to help you. Save it on your desktop somewhere. And then if that doesn't work, reach out to your instructor or your success coach. As I said at the beginning, we're committed to helping you be successful, to helping you become a better writer. And so I love it when students send me an email and say, hey, I need help with this. And I know our success coaches feel the same way.
Mhm. We certainly do. And if there's any chance also, and I hope this never happens, where one of those people does not get back to you, please contact the other one and we'll make sure that someone does connect with you, because that really is our heart here, to connect, for you not to be alone, so that when you do feel nervous or overwhelmed, we're here to help you through the process.
Absolutely. Does anyone have any other questions before we end the webinar?
I don't see any coming through.
Well, thank you very much. We appreciate your attendance. Hope you have a great rest of the week and hope you have a great end to your session here in fall 2. We'll talk to you soon.